projects have a kind of funny story behind them. And this wedding cake is one of those. I'll share why I created this cake and what I used it for. And I'll also share what you need to know in case you'd like to make one of your own. Whether it's a wedding, a shower, or a birthday, making a mosaic cake is a really fun way to celebrate these special events. Let's get to it. Welcome back. And if you're new here, my name is Julie. And on this channel, we talk about tips, tricks, tools, adhesives, materials, and specific mosaic projects, all to shorten your learning curve when it comes to creating mosaic art. So if that sounds like something you'd be interested in, please consider subscribing. A few weeks ago, I posted a shorts here on my YouTube channel, and it featured my mosaic wedding cake. And you guys were very complimentary, but you also were like, hey, what's up with the cake? I've shared the cake here on my channel a number of times, but I've never really talked about it and why did I make it and how did I make it and what do I do with it now? I have to admit that having a full-size mosaic wedding cake that is not edible is a bit unusual, but I had a plan and it came together beautifully. So for context, I created the cake around the end of 2004 and it's holding up beautifully as it should be. And we'll talk more about the construction of the cake a little later in the video. I wish that I had pictures to show you how I went through the process of making this cake, but back in 2009, my computer hard drive died and I lost all of my pictures. This was about a couple days before I gave birth to my son. It did not cause me to go into labor, but unfortunately, I don't have pictures, but I can walk you through the process and we will talk about that a little later in the video. So in this video, I'll share why I made this wedding cake, and I'll also do my best to take you through the process of how I created it in case you'd like to make one of your own. You never know. We've got a lot to cover, so let's get started. I made the cake for my wedding, which was back in 2005, but let me back up a little bit. I had never seen a mosaic wedding cake, and at the time that I dreamt up this idea, this was long before Pinterest was even a thing, but I knew what I wanted. But why make a life-size mosaic wedding cake? At the time of my engagement, I was working full-time in magazine publishing, so I was heavy into ad creation and logos and branding and magazine layout and all of those sorts of things. And I thought, how cool would it be to have a logo for my wedding? Not a monogram, but an actual logo for my wedding. Something that I mosaicked that we could then turn into a logo and use it throughout the wedding. So I created the wedding cake and I did it over a series of a number of months. Remember, I was working a 40 to 50 hour a week job in publishing, so I didn't kill myself over this, but I stretched it out. And then once I was done with the tiling of the cake, the art director for my magazines photographed the cake in the parking lot of my office building. Not exactly a studio chic background, but clearly he didn't need it. He took a series of pictures from different angles and we eventually settled on this one right here. This cake appeared at the top of my wedding invitation and the response card, the directions card. Remember, this was pre-GPS days. The dinner menu, the table numbers, the guest favor card, which also doubled as the table number assignment. So the only place basically that the cake didn't appear was on the front cover of the program, and I made a separate piece of mosaic art for that, and as well as the thank you note stationery. I also made the wedding guest favors, which of course were mosaic, but I'll talk about that in another video. So yeah, basically I branded my wedding. It was full-on mosaic all over the place. But the cake was the common theme. Oh, and the cake was on display at my wedding reception, and it was kind of fun because people wanted to take their picture with it, so I was not expecting that. And then later on, the Miami Herald did a couple articles about me and my artwork, and the cake was featured in those articles as well. And that's the story behind the Mosaic wedding cake. But how did I make the cake? As I mentioned, I had never seen a Mosaic wedding cake, and all of this was pre-Pinterest. So I came up with a design, and I crossed my fingers that it would work out. And it did. I had a general idea of what I wanted the design to be, but I wasn't sure how high or how big I wanted the cake to be. How many tiers? So I went to my local craft store and I looked at the cake pans, and at first I was thinking, oh, 3 tiers is good. I'll be able to get a good design going, and it'll be a good beefy cake, so to speak. But once I got there, I thought, no, it needs to be 4 tiers. So I decided on the metal cake pans, which are in the 6-inch, 8-inch, 10-inch, and 12-inch size. And then once I decided how big that largest cake pan was going to be, which was 12 inches, I then went to my local hardware store and I looked for a round piece of wood. Now, often you'll find these pieces of wood in the lumber section, and they're going to be marked for tabletops. The reason I needed a board was I needed something to adhere all of these cake pans to. It's not like I'm going to be carrying the cake around anywhere, but it really needed to be adhered to a sturdy substrate. And I needed to make sure that the substrate was thick enough to support the weight, and it wasn't going to bow over time. Plus, having a round board underneath the cake looks like how you would normally have a plate or a platter underneath an edible cake. So I found a board that worked really well, and it allowed for a 3.5-inch exposed area for more mosaic work. So I got to work measuring out the board to find the center, and then I added adhesive to the rim of the largest cake pan, the 12-inch size, and stuck it down to the board. The adhesive I used was Liquid Nails Clear. Why clear? It's just what I had lying around. The adhesive isn't going to show at all once everything is said and done. So, white, gray, or beige silicone would have worked just fine as well. Then I adhered the next largest size cake pan, the 10-inch pan, to the 12-inch pan, which is already stuck down to the substrate. Then I adhered the next largest size cake pan, the 8-inch pan, to the top of the 10-inch pan, and so on. So once all the pans were adhered to the substrate board and to each other, I let it sit and dry for a few days. For the mosaic design, I knew I wanted flowers. My late grandmother loved flowers and had quite a green thumb, so this was a way to include her and her influence into my wedding. For the tesserae, I opted to use stained glass and 3/4-inch vitreous glass. There are a few reasons for this. First, it allowed the colors I wanted. And second, both materials were similar in thickness to each other, so I wouldn't have to mess with building up pieces with adhesive in order to get a level surface on the substrates. And third, both types of tesserae are pretty easy to cut and nip into shapes I wanted. Remember, I was working a full-time job and I didn't want this project to take forever to create. So I got to work with tiling the exposed rim of each cake tier. I kept it simple and used uncut vitreous glass to create a border. I really wanted the sides of the cake pans to be the focus. Next, I tiled the top of the cake within the border with a variety of flowers. This flower design set the tone for the rest of the cake, and I wanted to make sure I used as many of the colors of glass as possible. Once the top of the cake was tiled, I got to work cutting stained glass in 2 different blue colors and tiled 2 ribbons, so to speak, on opposite sides of the cake, all the way down from the top tier of the cake to the bottom tier, and then onto the supporting substrate. The ribbons are cascading down from one tier to the next. And next up were the flowers on the body of the cake, and these fall within the glass ribbons that I had just tiled. I tried to space out the colors and not put two flowers of the same color next to each other, and I continued this tiling process tier by tier. The next area to be tiled was the round supportive substrate. So I cut strips of stained glass in all of the colors of the flowers and adhered them around the base of the cake. I also cut smaller pieces of stained glass and adhered them along the edge of the supportive substrate. So all that's left at this point, tiling-wise, is to fill in the background around the flowers, and I used white vitreous glass to do that. And once I was done tiling the background, I allowed the cake to sit and dry for a few days. I knew that I really wanted the bright colors of the tesserae to pop on this cake, so I didn't want the background color to be conflicting in any way. I also didn't want the grout to take away from the vibrancy of those colors. So I chose white grout for the cake, and I'm so glad I did. The grouting of this cake wasn't difficult or tricky. It just took a while between grouting and cleaning, but wow, was it worth it. I now keep this cake in the studio on a large, supportive Lazy Susan, which is then on top of a little stool. I'm very pleased with how it turned out, and like I said, I love that guests wanted to take their picture with it. Now, originally I wasn't planning to have it at the reception, but friends who knew about it encouraged me to make sure it was there. So that's the story and the process behind the Mosaic wedding cake. More better. More better. Much more better. I feel like I need a little something more there. A little something more. It needs to be zhuzhed up a little bit. And we're back. The battery died, so I had to change it. Yeah. Thanks for watching, and if you're looking for more Mosaic inspiration, you can check out one of these two videos. I'll see you soon. Bye.